Consumer profiling, an introduction to primary and secondary research methods, consumer demographics and ethnographies, and identifying consumer profiles. So let's take a look at what we've learnt so far. We began the project off by looking at our partners and competitors and analysing what they currently have in store. We tried to identify trends that they might have used for this season and see if these are united across various different brands and retailers. We looked at what's selling good for them and perhaps what's not selling quite so well, perhaps things that are in sales, for example, i.e. trends that haven't done quite so well for them. Then there's the fashion scan. So we should always be looking at our competitors like we've just done, but also travelling to fashion capitals if applicable with our jobs, or looking at trend hotspots. If that's not applicable to you, then you'll always be scanning print, broadcast and online sources the whole time, for example inspirational blogs and websites and fashion news feeds, as well as networking with people in the creative industry, whether that be face-to-face or kind of looking at blogs. We then looked at cultural indicators where we performed a pesto analysis where we looked at the bigger picture going on everywhere, which is macro environmental research. And now we are going to move on to our consumer scan. Let's take a look at this in a little more detail. Defining the ideal consumer. A consumer profile is a way of describing a consumer categorically so they can be grouped for marketing and advertising purposes. It is important that your trend stories target your brand or retailer's specific market segment to ensure the ranges designed from the trends will sell for them. As a shorthand way of talking about consumers, market segments are often represented by consumer profiles built up on information from demographic and ethnographic studies. So what do we mean by the terms demographics and ethnographies? Demography is defined as the branch of knowledge that deals with human populations, especially the statistical analysis of births, deaths, migration and disease, as illustrating the conditions of life in communities. Ethnography is the recording and analysis of a culture or society, usually based on participant observation and resulting in a written account of people, a place or institution. So let's look at some primary research examples of demographic studies. Demographic studies use a range of resources to gather statistics. First of all, you can interview your consumers, host focus groups with them, conduct surveys and questionnaires, all to gain feedback and input into their opinions. You can also access client databases. So for example, you've all seen emails in your inbox after you've bought something from a brand or retailer asking for feedback on their products and so on. So these are all primary methods of a way a retailer or brand can get information. You can also use social media and e-commerce monitoring at the same time, seeing what people are buying and what's selling best. These all provide us with quantitative outcomes. Next is ethnographic studies, primary research for ethnographic studies. Ethnographic studies are where researchers completely immerse themselves in the lives, culture or situation they're studying to gather data collection. An example of a primary research into ethnographic studies is when a famous ethnographic study was completed only after one author lived as a member of a gang in Chicago for 9 months. This allowed him to write about the organisational structure and the forms of power that existed in street gangs. These all result in qualitative outcomes. So what secondary resources can we use to gain some information into these? Market reports and text. You can access the census, books, journals, media and studies, as well as digital resources, for example Mintel, LSN Global, PSFK, WGSN and Edited. So we might not all be fortunate enough to have memberships with those digital resources, but the marketing reports and text you can widely access on the net these days. So why do we need this information? This information allows us to forecast, analyse and monitor changes within a target market sector or consumer group, making sure that we're targeting the right consumer, as consumer groups and forecasts change the whole time. So basically, statistical modelling combined with quantitative and qualitative insights gives you a good secondary resource forecast. Creating the ideal consumer profile or consumer profiles. To start, consumers can be identified by many different categories such as gender, sexual orientation, age brackets, marital status, educational levels, occupation, marital status, home ownership, nationality, pet ownership, place of residence, political affiliation, religious affiliation, number of children, geographic location, ethnic groups, preferences, lifestyle, stage of life, attributes and traits. as well as many more. Consumer profile tiers. Thinking about consumers in terms of the way they are represented by categorical tiers can be useful. The first tier includes the most common categories for describing consumers, such as demographics, socio-economical status, and product usage. The second tier extends the concepts of the first tier and includes psychographics, generation, geography, geodemographics, and benefits sought. Let's explore the basic definitions of these concepts in a little more detail. First tier. Demographics. Demographics describes attributes related to age, city or region of residence, gender, race and ethnicity, and composition of a household. Social economic status. Social economic status describes the attributes related to a household's income, educational attainment, occupation, neighbourhood, and association memberships. Brand affinity and product usage describes attributes associated with product engagement on the basis of their behaviour. Second tier. Psychographics. Psychographic attributes relate to lifestyles, life stage, personality, attributes, attitudes, opinion, and even voting behaviour of individuals. Generation. Attributes related to a specific identifiable generation cohort group, something we'll come back more to shortly. Geography. Attributes related to the geographical area in which consumers reside and work. Geodemographics, which describe the attributes that combine geography and demographics, which may cluster into identifiable groups. And finally, benefits sought. This describes the attributes related to the benefits that consumers seek when they shop for products and services. Market research. Consumer profiles can be identified in a variety of manners, including analysis and prediction of consumer behaviour from Pestel research and trends, quantitative research in the form of questionnaires, qualitative research involvement with focus groups, and researching secondary source information, like we said, from websites analysing things like the census. Market researchers may develop proprietary consumer profiles, or they may use panels of consumers who have been classified according to their common attributes. Market research provider firms often make their consumer profiles available for discrete market research projects that are conducted for their market research clients at large companies. Market research categories. By attaining information about potential customers, you can start to get a clear picture of likes, dislikes, and buying behaviours of your consumer profiles. You can then make sure that the trends you are targeting at these consumers are appropriate and will result in fashion ranges that sell. Consumer demographics. Some examples of classification categories that market research firms use include ABC1. A common grouping strategy in the market research industry is based on the professional job role of an individual, a person designated as the head of household or the main contributor of income to a family. This grouping strategy is typically referred to as ABC1. You'll quite often hear people describe something like, I'm targeting this brand at mainly type A personalities, which is shorthand for the first three socio-economic groups in the taxonomy. Let's have a look at these in more detail. So type A refers to an individual who is in a high managerial and administrative or professional position. Type B, intermediate managerial, administrative or professional. C1, supervisory or clerical, administrative or professional. C2, skilled manual worker. D, semi or unskilled manual workers. And finally type E, all of those entirely dependent on the state long term. Another market research category is life stage and other special groups. Examples of these are mostly categorised according to proprietary consumer research or census-based research. Different countries associated specific percentages with each of the life stage groups. The standard taxonomy for life stage groups is shown below. Pre-family or no family, people under the age of 45 who are not parents. Family, people of any age with at least one child aged under 16 still living at home. Third age, people aged 45 to 64 with no children under the age of 16 still living at home. Retired, people over the age of 65 with no children under the age of 16 still living at home. Another category is referred to as ACORN. The market research industry also uses a consumer group taxonomy known as ACORN. The basis of ACORN categories is geodemographic segmentation. Relying on census data primarily, the taxonomy uses residential areas to categorise consumers. Postcodes can be associated with specific ACORN categories. Because people who live in neighbourhoods tend to share a good number of attributes, the ACORN method of classifying consumers may be more powerful than a more generic classification based on only demographic, economic or socio-economic factors. Let's take a look at the ACORN category in more detail. The ACORN categories and their associated components are described below. Wealth achievers, category 1. A. Wealthy executives. B. Affluent greys. C. Flourishing families. Urban prosperity, category 2. D. Prosperous professionals. E. Educated urbanities. F. Aspiring singles. Comfortably off, category 3. G. Starting out. H. Secure families. I. Settled suburbia. J. Prudent pensioners. Moderate means, category 4. K. Asian communities. L. Post-industrial families. M. Blue collar roots. Hard pressed, category 5. N. Struggling families. O. Burdened singles. P. High-rise hardship. Q. Inner city adversary. Lastly, and probably the most common market research category used in the fashion industry, refers to generation cohorts. So let's look at these in a bit more detail. Generation cohorts. Similarities in patterns and consumer behaviour have been traced to generation cohorts who share the same age, location in history and a collective mindset. This theory suggests involuntary group membership from birth onwards. All members encounter the same events, trends at a similar age, giving each cohort a distinct biography and peer personality. So the first one we're looking at is the GI generation, born between 1901 and 1924. They lived through the Great Depression and fought in World War II as young adults. Originally 20 million strong, this generation has declined to less than 5 million now. Consumption mainly limited to daily maintenance and healthcare. Their purchases tend to be through their boomers caregivers. In 2017, this generation are 85 years or older. The silent generation. Born between 1925 and 1945, this generation came of age during the 1950s. Of the 53 million born into this generation, about 45 million remain. This group purchases centre on delaying ageing and remaining independent, eating out and shopping for a bargain. In 2017, this generation are 85 or older. The baby boom generation, one that probably most people are familiar with hearing with. Born between 1946 and 1964, the children in this generation were the result of a post-World War II baby boom. Boomers were the first TV generation and fought the first televised war in Vietnam. This is the generation of Youthquake, the Summer of Love, Woodstock and Earth Day festivals. They can be subdivided into an older cohort, flower children and hippies of the late 60s, and a younger cohort who became yuppies, young urban professionals, of the early 80s. The 75 million boomers control much of the nation's wealth and retire at a rate of 1 every 8 seconds. Boomers value products that make life easier or save time. In 2017, this generation aged between 53 and 71. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. This generation experienced a higher risk of being children of divorce and grew up as latchkey kids, members of blended families due to remarriage. The first computer generation, Generation X consumers, are experienced shoppers, fond of pop culture, and cynical about media manipulation. This is a small generation, 9 million fewer than boomers. These consumers don't respond to conventional media and are difficult to target in the fragmentation of the internet. In 2017, this generation are aged between 41 and 52. Millennials, or otherwise known as Generation Y. Millennials are born between 1977 and 1994. This generation's parents are mainly from the boomers generation, and the size of the generation is almost equal to them. Their purchasing is at 500% more than that of their boomer parents. They are attentive in cyberspace and fickle with their tastes and expect the best. This group favours brands and retailers with strong ethics. This is the generation that is rethinking everything and taking the fashion industry with it. Millennials are aged between 21 and 38 in 2015. The final two generations are ones that are emerging at the moment, and we still don't have too much information on them as they haven't got to the point where they're working yet. Born between 1995 and 2007, members of the I generation are aged between 8 and 20 in 2015. And then we have our emerging generation. The newest generation began in 2008 as the annual number of births declined sharply with the recession. In 2015, members of this as yet unnamed generation are younger than 8. This generation is now often referred to as Generation Z. Creating and identifying a consumer profile. You may find the retail sector identifies with a variety of consumer profiles. There is not just one specific one. This is absolutely fine. You can create a variety of consumer profiles to target your brand at and your trends. Creating a consumer profile becomes a much easier task once you've collected the information above on current and potential customers. Profiles that describe specific segments will allow you to envisage a person interested in your product and give you a better understanding of what would motivate them to find and, more importantly, buy from your business. Start simple. Describe your potential consumers using their categories listed previously and create a named persona or named personas. Create a specific profile for each client group identified in the categories listed. Consider buying behaviour, preferences and traits when creating each persona. Once you have a clear picture of the type of customers your brand should be targeting, you can create a 10 story appropriate to them. Your ideal customer profile will help you pinpoint the who, where and how to reach potential customers interested in what your trend is saying. Consumer profile examples. Here are some real-life examples of consumer profiles I created for a project a couple of years ago. Let's look at each one in a bit more detail. You can see with each one I've laid them out similar as we did with the pastel, using a combination of image and text to describe their traits. This one, the hipster mum we identified, we describe where she lives, the type of home she lives in, the places she goes on holiday, her leisure interests, where else she shops, things such as what she reads, describe her lifestyle in terms of where she does her shopping, and give some statistics as to the size of her family, the number of children, the type of car, their annual income, as well as things like whether they're interested in recycling. A second one we identified was the New Earth mum. Again, slightly different. She shops at different places, has different ethics, has different hobbies, different places that she goes on holiday. And these are all described both visually and within text here. Another consumer profile done by a student that I worked with in the past, she just uses a number of images to describe her consumer profile, along with some of the essential parts and demographics that her consumer profile belongs to. She goes on to create a second page with some imagery describing the kind of mood of her consumer profile too, which works really, really successfully. And here is another nice example of a consumer profile with a combination of imagery and text describing the traits of the individual. Task. Taking all the information from this lesson, try to identify your brand's consumer profile or profiles. Re-listen, reread, and pause on some of the consumer profile example pages that I've shown you. You should create your consumer profiles visually, like in the examples presented previously to you, using both a combination of text and imagery to build up a picture of your consumer profile's traits. Here is some good essential further reading on the subject.